Welcome everyone to Shinkyu University. My name is Maya Suzuki, and today I am very pleased and excited to be interviewing Kubota Sensei, who is out of Asheville, North Carolina. He is a Japanese practitioner trained in Japan who is now working in Asheville. And he does a very interesting style, very traditional style of classical Japanese acupuncture. And so he just has a really interesting viewpoint on the medicine. He also does teach. For those of you who are new to this channel, please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the little bell to be notified whenever we put out new videos, which we try to do every single week. And if you have any questions about this, don't forget to leave it in the comments below. I'll also be leaving all of Kubota Sensei's contact information in the description box, so you can go ahead and check that out there if you'd like to learn more with him. If you'd like to work more on getting a foundation in your Japanese acupuncture practice, don't forget to check out Shinkyu University. All right, so without further ado, this is Kubota Sensei. Kubota Sensei, so nice to meet you. I know we've talked a little bit on the phone. Konnichiwa.
Yeah. So I'm happy to connect up with you, and hopefully I can help a lot of people, teaching my style. That's a very unique style, so very rare, because not many people are teaching, because all my teachers die. So but only me is teaching this style. So yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit more about, why don't we start with how you made the transition to the United States, and then could you go into a little bit more about your style of acupuncture?
Yeah. So I went to Meiji Acupuncture School, Oriental Medicine School in Osaka, Japan, and graduated 1977. And I found this my master teacher in Kobe, Uchida Sensei. She's already, already 75 or somewhere. That time it was 40 years ago, and I asked her to please let me study with her, and she said okay. So I started working with her, and she told me one day, Kubota-san, do this, do that, and so show me how to do this her style acupuncture. So I did, and very unique, because she never told me about style, her style. Just she said Uchida style, I guess, but very similar to Ishizakay-ryu. After I realized, after I studied from other teacher, and I studied with her clinic 3 years. Then I met the American woman from Mississippi. So we packed up all the stuff and put in the boat and went to Europe, and with 2-year girls with the German, Paris, and England, and toured Europe, and went to Boston and met the friend, Michelle Matsuda. He was in Boston, was doing acupuncture clinic there with next to, he's a macrobiotic, so he near the Michio Kushi's house, and so I went there, Boston. There met some guy in DC area, also macrobiotic acupuncturist, Michael also, and talked to him, and well, then she was living in Asheville, so we came to Asheville, and I liked it. It looks like a Kyoto, just like mountains and rivers and old towns, and so I felt like my home. So that ended up in 40 years in Asheville. So then I started open the clinic at my house. That 40 years ago, no license, nothing. So we just did quietly. Yeah, but after 40 years, I can kind of communicate little. So I started teaching classes, and I taught martial arts, Aiki Jiu-Jitsu, and Ishizakay-ryu acupuncture. I'm very he willing to teach this acupuncture because nobody else teaching, because
Yeah.
by that it's gone pretty
So,
much.
and just for those of you who are watching who
Yeah.
don't know a lot about Japanese acupuncture, fundamentally, I would say fundamentally a really common aspect of all Japanese acupuncture styles, and Kubota Sensei, tell me if you disagree, is that it's very palpation based. So we like to really palpate the patient and touch and decide on a point based on our hands. We definitely use both left and right hands when we're needling.
Right.
And then there's also this heavier integration of moxibustion into the treatment.
I see.
So,
well, yeah, I don't use moxa because smell. People don't like some people don't like smell. So, but Ishizakay-ryu used to my teacher in Kobe did the moxa, but they didn't burn the moxa, but they use a garlic. They call garlic moxa. It's just they grate up garlic, tons of garlic, and put in a bell, clay bell, and put the salt, and then make miso. So fermented garlic miso. So then they bring up and upstairs we had the clinic and a double boil, and they make a little rice hole kind of thing, and put it in your back after the acupuncture treatment. So that's part of Ishizaka tradition, using garlic moxa. But after she died, they quit doing that because neighbor, the smell, all over neighbor complaining. So, so they quit doing that. They're using infrared. Anyway, so historically, Ishizaka, the Sotetsu Ishizaka, he originated this style in Edo Period, and he was born in 1770. So he, his family was acupuncturist, and he was born in the Fujiwara family, not the Ishizaka family. And the Ishizaka family had a son, but very sick, so he had to adapt somebody to adapt and take care tradition. So Ishizaka family went to Sugiyama school.
Really?
Yeah, Sugiyama Waichi school. Sugiyama-ryu, Chinkyu, Doin, Keikosho, that's Edo, in Tokyo, all over the Tokyo. He had about 40 schools at that time. And so Sugiyama was studying Irie-ryu. Irie-ryu, that's older than Sugiyama-ryu. And Irie-ryu was started when Toyotomi Hideyoshi went to Korea, tried to invade Korea, and took all the army. And they took this Irie acupuncturist with him, so with the army, and they met this Chinese Ming Dynasty doctor Wu Linda, Wu family. So Wu is connected to Tai Chi or Qigong style. Wu. So Irie brought Wu's acupuncture, and they started Irie acupuncture, and then Sugiyama Waichi went to his school, Irie, and studied with Irie, couple, father and grandfather. Anyway, so that's where Sugiyama learned Irie-ryu. So a lot of technique came from Irie-ryu and went to Sugiyama-ryu. Then Sugiyama had a whole bunch of technique, Hosha, sedative or tonifying technique, but the sei and kake, K and sei. So sei is I think whole, or kake maybe a sha, I'm not sure, maybe. So anyway, whole bunch technique in Sugiyama-ryu. So Ishizaka went to that school and studied that Sugiyama-ryu, and also he studied other style Japanese Ryuha, like other different schools. But then he was at that time, or Western medicine came into Tokyo, Japan, and they brought all the anatomy book and physiology from Europe, Holland most mainly, German, Holland. But, so he studied anatomy from German doctor, Dr. Siebel. He was with Holland, Dutch army. He was a doctor for Dutch army, but his job was not almost like researching whole Japanese culture, history, and medicine, and plants and animals and everything. So he was an encyclopedist, and also he was a surgeon and OBGYN and eye doctor. So he came to Nagasaki and opened up first Western medical school called Nagasaki Juku. So he taught a bunch of Japanese herbalists and acupuncturists, Western medicine. So Ishizaka and Chibo was kind of become friends and teaching each other. Chibo was trying to teach anatomy, so he sent a chart of artery and vein chart, so he can copy it, and he explained in the Kanban. They made a published chart, and so then Ishizaka gave him like a 9 needle set and come again those gold, silver needle, and his published book, several published book on acupuncture and observation and Nexin, like a post-diagnosis kind of thing. So they then when the Nagasaki people they had to go to Edo to meet the Shogun every 4 years or something. So they travel all the way to Nagasaki to walk to, Nagasaki, Kyoto, and Nagoya, and they went to Edo, Tokyo. And they met each other at the Edo Castle. So that time, Sibo asked Sotetsu to give me acupuncture in my arm. So Sotetsu didn't do it, but his Deshi or son, the son-in-law, gave him needle. But he didn't do whole body treatment. So that was kind of mistake, or maybe they didn't have time to do it. That if he did the whole treatment, Ishizakay-ryu treatment, Sibo might change the mind. He thought just put in a couple of needles, nothing happened, no infection, no, So there was that. Then Sibo told him, if I can cut your arm and put it together, sew together. So that was a joke. What is that joke? But anyway, so that's the kind of side story. But so Ishizaka studied Western anatomy physiology. So they combine and Chinese classic. In a Sugiyama school, a lot of student is blind, like Toyo Hari people, blind. So they have to memorize whole book of Neichin, Rinshu Shuen, and Nanqing, and the Shahan Long. Memorize. They people can read with so they listen to and they memorize the whole book. So that way, Sugiyama-ryu, blind student, they study. So it took many years. So, but curriculum of the Sugiyama school was 3 years. First 3 years, study amma, massage or doing. But they can start it like a younger, like a grade school level, 5 year, 8 years. Then after 3 years, start touching the needle and the practice tube insertion to practice and in and out. then study Sugiyama. You have 3 books, Sugiyama-ryu, Sambisho. So they study those. Also, then after that, this is a grade middle school level, then go to high school, 4 year or whatever. So they started studying classic, Chinese classic.
Could I cut you off there for just one second?
Sure.
Because you very quickly summarized a lot of Japanese history. And so I just want to go back, just for those who don't know anything about Japanese acupuncture history. I'm just going to add just a few little nuggets of information to help them understand the amazing history lesson that you just gave. So the first is that during the Edo period, Japan had its doors closed to the West. And so Westerners were only allowed to come into Japan through 2 main ports in the country. They were allowed to come in through Yokohama, which is below Tokyo, or what Kubota Sensei was referring to as Edo, which was the original name of Tokyo, which is
but the only port was Nagasaki.
Yes, and Nagasaki, yeah.
And
that was Dutch Holland. Yeah. Yes, Dutch. Only for the Dutch was in Nagasaki. And so even to this day, Nagasaki, the city of Nagasaki, which is on the eastern seaboard of Japan, the lower eastern seaboard, has a huge Dutch influence. There's a lot of like coffee and what they call Baumkuchen, this great little cake. So that's part of just a little bit of background information about what was happening while Ishizakay-ryu was being created. And then the other part is this Sugiyama Waiichi, the Sugiyama Shindenryu style. So Sugiyama Waiichi was the person who created, he was a blind practitioner who created the guide tube. There's a story, I don't know if it's true, but I've heard the story that he was like walking through Kamakura, which is where he's from, and he tripped over a piece of bamboo. He was like normally not, apparently he wasn't a really good student of acupuncture, is the story I've heard. And then he tripped over a piece of bamboo, and that's where he got this idea, was to make guide tubes out of thin little bamboo shoots. Is that, do I have that story correct?
And bamboo or straw.
Yeah.
And had a pine needle in the bamboo.
Oh, interesting.
So, so like a needle in the bamboo too. So, that's why even blind, I can exact point, pinpoint it, acupuncture point, then you tap it. So make sure it's a correct acupuncture point. So that's the.
Because he wasn't really, from what I've heard, he wasn't like super good at getting the exact points.
Right.
And so he created this, and this helped him to propel him to being a very famous and widespread acupuncturist. And of course, now the guide tube, I think, is something that almost all acupuncturists throughout the world use, from classical Chinese all the way to TCM in the United States.
Because
so a fundamental person in history.
Invention, that's a purpose is exact point that you can pick. Then also Japanese use much thinner needle gauge, so you can't jab it in like a Chinese needle. Be much more softer. You can't just put it in so that needle bend. So a tube will support needle inside, hold straight. Then you tap it in. So needle goes straight to quickly. And when you do quickly, it doesn't hurt. But if you do slow, that hurts. So you go boom, like a whipping, not just you can't do this. It just hurts, but boom. So like a whipping. So that much more quicker you do, less painful. So that's a good tube. Using tube is you can hit very hard with a tube. So they go, choo. So that's another good point. Too.
Yeah, and something that I didn't know, I just learned actually, was that I had no idea that Sugiyama Waiichi's school was like an entire school system for the blind. And mainly I think his school was for the blind. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Because at the time it was illegal for most people who weren't blind to practice acupuncture. It was actually a protected position, a protected job for blind acupuncturists. Yes.
Yeah. Waiichi was a blind man's guild, head of the guild. So they support blind people. So like co-op or group for support each other. Then brown people, they teach acupuncture, amma, and music instrument too, like koto, shamisen, biwa. So they can make money, the brown people. So they wandering around like a musician. You go street music, they can make money. So that's the guild build up school to teach brown people. That was all over the Japan, but the Waichi school was in mostly Edo area. 40 school he built, and also many rank like a pyramids. I will say, you have to go through each level you pay. I don't know, $110,000 or $100,000 to go up the level. So he's making a lot of money too. Because make sure he's, also brown people can do loan sharking, not the loan sharking, so loan the money to other people to make interest, to make money to support. So that's another way. So Sugiyama was become rich because have a big school, student loan, get the student loan with her from him, and he's making all kind of money. Also, he made many grades, so more you have, they make more money, right? So it doesn't have to be. You don't want to be too simple. If you have a more grade level, you can keep continuing to make money. Also, they were teaching class at an upper level or hiden or okuden. They had to stay in the 50 years age of 50 still in the school. Yeah.
So your teacher, the main person who created Ishizakay-ryu, Ishizaka style, Ishizaka Sensei, did he go through all of Sugiyama's styles, and was he also a blind practitioner?
Yeah, then when he was not blind, but his adopted grandfather was blind. He was the original Ishizaka family, but he was blind, so he studied acupuncture. Then became like a Shogun's doctor. Then second generation also called Sotetsu Ishizaka, same name, but he was not blind. So then he also became Shogun's doctor. So in Japan, those job like a Shogun give you job, you have to have a older son to give to next generation. If you don't have a son, they lose the job. So that's why people adopted the son, boy, to keep your job, continue. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
So yeah, so it's like Sotetsu become also Shogun's doctor after he started before he graduated, not completed till 50 years old. He was very quickly learned because he can read a book and all that, memorize. So very quickly passed 3 years, another 3 years. Then went to studying classic, level, third, like a high school level, and graduated. Then he got teaching certificate after that. So like studied Sugiyama Shinden-ryu too. So he could teach, but they had to sign up oath after graduate, and you have a teaching certificate license. You can't teach in the Edo area because against Sugiyama's school.
Right.
So he had to go outside the Edo, Tokyo, and Kofu. Kofu is Yamashina prefecture, northern kind of mountain, go out toward the Nagano area, mountain area. So he was born there, Kofu, in the Fujiwara family. And he went back to the family roots and opened a school, Acupuncture school, Kofu Igakukan. Yakan. So that started, opened up, and had a bunch of people, 200 people all over the Japan came the first year. And but just started school a couple of years, and his wife died with some epidemic. And, his vice principal died too. So he got kind of depressed, and the shogun told him to come back to Edo and see me. So then he went to Edo back, and he published first big book, Shinkyu Setsugaku, and he gave it to the shogun. Went to see the shogun, and I gave it to him. And shogun asked him, that Ienari shogun, 12th generation, I think, shogun. So that shogun was like a Tokugawa family had like a 3 main family. They used to take care of shogun, but those 3 lost all the son, die, or so the 4th one came up. So Ienari shogun was the 4th one, so it became first shogun from this family. So this Ienari's father and grandfather say, "Oh, you had to keep this job to our family." So he had 17 wife.
Wow.
And 50 kids. 17 wife, 50 kids, because they don't want to lose the shogun job. That's his job. Like a horse, make a baby, kind of stuff. So he was in Ooku. Ooku is like a harem in the Edo castle. The only woman can go, and only shogun and doctor, like a Ishizaka Sotetsu can go. He was in all day in a harem and trying to make a baby. So anyway, so shogun asked Sotetsu, "Can you make me very strong and healthy, make more baby?" "Oh, of course. My acupuncture is set up for general well-being or health. You just treat whole body to make you healthy and strong." So okay, all right, you become a shogun's doctor. Come back tomorrow and give me an acupuncture. So he went every other day to Edo Castle and treated him, shogun, and wife, concubine, and baby, or son or daughter, whatever. So that's started this. So he published a bunch of books, 40 books in life, and some of acupuncture, some of herb, ginseng book about ginseng. He was some study herb in Shanghai study, so he knows some herbs. So he was trying to make Korean ginseng in Tokyo, Edo, to reduce price. And then importing from Korea is so expensive. So they trying to cultivate ginseng. So he published a book about ginseng.
Ishizaka Sensei became the doctor for the shogunates.
Mm-hmm.
And then at what point does he continue to be the doctor for the shogunate? At one point, does like Ishizakay-ryu really become like widespread within the community enough that it starts to perpetuate itself outside of Sugiyama style?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So after came back to Edo, he was allowed to teach Ishizaka-ryu because not Sugiyama-ryu, right? So he had to create different name and technique, similar technique they have, but they have to put a different name for technique. Then he can allow to teach. So he had like a private teaching school at his office house. So that he teach, and he what do you say? he published a lot of book, and then the Myakushин, some of Myakushин book, he had own theory in the Myakushин, his own use those three, 3 and 3. He goes here and this and the ankle. Those all classic, Rinshu Shuen pose. So that's just the major in upper body and middle and lower to compare which one is strong or weak. Then balancing out if it's weak, upper jaw or upper dande, or they treat to open up blockage. So that's, and so Ishizaka's style is, it's opening up major meridians in the body. That's the key point. So what they find out, I was not sure first, but I was studying this Lao Tzu, Lao Ti Chen, reading that, and he was mentioning this chom mai. Keep saying 3 times he used chom. That's just same as a chom mai in acupuncture meridian, but Lao Tzu was saying is a great chom mai, which is different than chom mai in the book, like eight meridians, kike, not that. So they figured out Ishizaka too, but Lao Tzu was mentioning chom mai as the main energy flow in the body, and it goes through by fu to hui yin, like a tube shape energy flow in the whole body. That is called chom, great chom. So that's Lao Tzu saying. And I figured out, that's Ishizaka also saying great chom in his book. And some Rinshu Shuen book and Wang Bin wrote the book were mentioned in the chapter 1 is a great chom. They mentioned great. So why they put the great, not just the chom? So great means big or most important. So that I put it all together. Ishizaka say, Lao Tzu say, Wang Bin say, it's different than original, like people mentioning in a book about chom. So much more important role in have a great chom mai have. It's a chom mai is a book of say sea of 12 meridian and sea of chi, sea of blood, sea of everything, pretty much. Whole body related to this main energy flow in the center. It's a hollow structure, and it's a energy flow in the whole universe is same, called torus energy flow. And all the galaxy, Earth, Sun, everything have a energy flow same, all same. Torus is a donut-shaped energy flow. And the whole human body have same thing, torus, called actually 3, brain torus, heart torus, and the intestine torus. Those 3 major energy flow. So I find out, and that's Ishizaka trying to open up a great choma. But choma is deep inside. But so he mentioned great choma as he's more like a Western anatomy oriented person. So he put the great choma as the descending aorta.
Interesting.
So yeah, so you can see that part, the choma. Everything is a tube, and the whole body have a artery, vein, digestive tube, nerve to everything is two.
Yeah.
You have to have a whole to move energy or food or water or blood. Have to have two, empty. So empty cup, like Lao Tzu said, empty cup can full water. But if it's full, stuck, no energy, move. You see? So that's Lao Tzu was mentioning, hinting, this you have to be, Chongmai is Dao, same thing. Name Dao is equal Chong. Equal and
So let me make sure I understand this correctly, because I think it's a really interesting concept. That, because I know that from our previous conversations, you had mentioned that Ishizakay-ryu, because it was developed for a shogunate samurai class, which is a very physically oriented, working out everyday kind of people, and that Ishizaka Sensei was very Western anatomically oriented, that the actual practice of Ishizakay-ryu is a little bit more, I don't want to use the word aggressive, but a little bit more like muscle, meridian, slightly deeper needling, a stronger needling practice. But the main concept behind that practice is to open up this big or great Chongmai. So while it's very, because I think this is just really cool, and it really summarizes Japanese acupuncture so well, that the acupuncture practice itself is, while it's going into the muscle meridians and really working with the muscle meridians and the main meridians, and it's a little bit more aggressive, I guess you could say in air quotes, compared to other Japanese styles, like maybe Toyohari or something like that. That the main focus is only and always to open up the great Chongmai.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really
that's the main purpose. Yeah.
Oh.
So you can't directly stimulate Chongmai because it's deep inside. You can't go there.
Yeah.
So he used Dumai, Renmai, and Hara, and Watojaji, and Brother Maria. That's the main point to trying to open up Chongmai in the deep inside.
So Hara is stomach, just by the way, for those who don't know Japanese. Hara is treating the stomach and abdomen cavity directly.
Renmai, Hara, and kidney, meridian, and the stomach and spleen you can use in a Hara, the stomach, abdomen. But main focus is back point.
Which is amazing, because I think that goes back to a more classical view of the bladder meridian, because one of the things I try to put forth to my students in Shinkyu University, which is something that my teacher Yokoda Kampu Sensei mentions in his book on the meridians, is that the bladder meridian was traditionally not always called the bladder meridian, because you can access all of the meridians from the bladder meridian, and it is so useful to treat everything in the body.
Right, yeah, that's right, correct. Because all the shoe point is related to all 12 meridian too. But Chongmai is the C of 12 meridian too.
So would you say that, when I think Chongmai, the first thing I think is right here on the back of your neck, yes? What would you say, this is getting a little bit too in depth perhaps, but what would you say is like the biggest access point to the great Chongmai? Would you say that's the bladder meridian?
Yeah, brother, I started with brother, what is it, brother shoulder in here, brother
like 13, 11 to 13-ish.
Starting point. Open up the artery from heart, directly open up very closest point to you stimulate heart blood circulation.
Are you talking about Daijo Fumon?
Daijo.
Okay, so like bladder 11-ish. Okay.
Yeah, left Daijo.
Okay.
Left side. So that's open up ascending aorta, descending aorta too.
Interesting.
That's
so cool. I like that.
Yeah, right there. So very direct, and they right as you said, deeper. At some point you go deeper because trying to reach close to the rechoma in the middle. So lower, back under lumbar area, sacrum, you can go deep, but not the upper part, because don't puncture lung or heart. So it's very shallow, and the upper neck also, you go shallow. But you go deep, lower, lumbar sacrum area, you can go inch to inch, depend on how big is the patient is, but to reach whatever blockage is. And the most blockage is built up around the spine. That's the main blockage you can find when you palpate. You feel a blockage all over on the spine, both sides of the spine. That's the focus, to open up the back side, get more tense, yang side. Inside, usually soft, stomach is very soft. Only maybe if somebody have a cancer or something, you feel hard, not. But that's a rare case, but the mostly soft front, so it doesn't go deep or up, shallow, in and out.
If someone who is a mainly TCM practitioner, maybe they've studied, somewhere, it doesn't matter, somewhere outside of Japan, and they've only studied TCM, what do you think are the necessary tools that they should have and the necessary knowledge that they should have in order to really dive deep into Ishizakay-ryu? And
so, your teaching is good, basic technique, and it's Ishizakay-ryu is in and out technique, not we don't leave it in needle. So you have to learn how to master two-hand insertion first, and then go to one hand, and to at least 12 times in a minute. Practice 12 times. You can in and out, 1 minute, 12 times. That's a kind of basic study. So I teach every student. You just do two hand first. And if you get used to it, switch to one hand, practice. Then if you get better, you can go in and out. That's we have three acupuncture technique Ishizakay-ryu, basic Yudo-shi. Yudo-shi is in and out, like a sanshin, kind of like sanshin, but it's an aim to Watojaji or Brother Marie or Duma. So use in and out on the Watojaji from top to bottom, go down, always go down. So that's very useful, because if you learn how to quickly insert in and out to Shinkan technique, and you free up the left hand to palpitate next point. You looking next point, right? Left hand. So you coordinate, left hand touching the blockage and find out blockage. Then you put in needle.
And I would counter to say that that's possibly, really for any Japanese acupuncture style. I know, especially for Yashinomichi and for Shonishin, pediatric acupuncture, really, really important to be able to do your guide, do reload, be able to palpate as you're searching for your points, and have your needle ready, wrong hand, well, have your needle ready while you have your next point to insert your needle.
So that's same. I guess all Japanese in and out technique is a lot of different schools use. So not just I guess Ishizakay-ryu. Okay. So we don't have much. Only three very simple technique. Sanshin, like in and out. That's the relaxing the whole body. Back shoot, back point. Wato, using wato on the back shoot point. And then that whole body can, and it's almost like make you sleepy, anesthetize. So then you can go deeper, after that. So that's called Yudo-shi. Then the next to you, we have Renkan-shi. Renkan-shi is like a crescent shaped body parts, like a octopus or shoulder blade. Inside the shoulder blade go like a crescent shape, in and out, crescent, or hip, sacrum, sacral iliac area, crescent shape. So that's another way. Then senchishi. Senchishi was like a horizontal way, go like a sewing the go along with the bone, kind of cleaning the bone. They in Meiji school they had teacher teach sokotsu shimpo, like a cleaning the bone shimpo. He put the needle in go direction of the bone to clean up arthritis, whatever. So that's the only three technique. And in the classic, he had mentioned classic 5 needling from Renshu or Shuren, but I never use it. But there is a five different needling for different part of body, like a bone, skin, and muscles and ligament, that type of thing. But I don't really use those. But mainly 3 basic techniques.
So if someone, so it sounds like to really study with you and to study Ishizaka style, because it sounds really like a very interesting style, is that one, really have a solid foundation, so be able to do guide to reload, solid foundation of palpation and being able to find points. I'm sure what we call kamai is probably pretty important too, which is how you approach the needle. It's all pretty similar to other styles. And then you also need to have these 3 techniques. And then I'm sure there's theory and stuff like that too. How do students come to learn with you?
It's doing seminar with different parts, like a history parts and the theory parts, then technique parts. So in the end, so and that video have a afternoon. I did the whole demonstration, whole body, one patient. So that way you can watch what I'm doing. So and also you have to learn how to use chi energy in the whole body to move the needle. So it's not just a finger technique. You have to learn energy from Danben. You can move to your body, move to arm, you to fingertip, and then go into needle. So that you have to practice, but I have to teach how to move the whole bodies. So in a tradition, they say, teachers say, you watch your teacher from distance. You see, so you can see whole body, what she's doing. So I was watching my teacher, Uchida Sensei. She was very short, about this size. It's she's so powerful. It's finger is like an arthritis, like this, and the shape like a holding needle forever. So, but her left hand so powerful, and he touched the patient, boom, ouch. She can find one point, pain, whatever exactly painful spot. So amazing, but so powerful, everybody jumped up. So painful. Anyway, so yeah, very important left hand, how to check the blockage, where is the blockage, and put the needle, open up. That's pretty simple. So it's actually very simple, and get into the core, and nothing else. No psychological, philosophical. It's just find the point, do it. So.
Well, I mean, it sounds like we've had conversations before this where you were saying that my style Iyashinomichi has very similar roots with both Sugiyama Waiichi and other books, and it just sounds so incredibly similar. I really just can't wait to go down to Asheville to meet you, to be quite honest. I love Love to
I
go
give you,
to Asheville.
give you needle acupuncture.
You know, just a few right here is just fine.
Yeah.
You know, I know that you do take practitioners at your clinic to study as well, and that you teach sometimes in school.
Uh-huh.
So what I'd love to do is in the description box below, I'm going to put in all of your contact information for those who would really like to come and study with you more in depth, because I think you're a bit of a treasure here in the United States, simply because most Japanese acupuncturists who are at the level that you are at, Kubota Sensei, one, don't speak English enough to really teach, and two, they're in Japan, you know, which makes it really hard for many students to,
I know.
unfortunately, to really study. It's really, really unfortunate. And that includes my teacher. You know, my teacher, Yasuda Sensei, is in Japan. And since I am no longer in Japan, it's very hard for me to go and study with him all the time. So you're just such a treasure. And I'd really love to make sure that people can study with you in the future, and that people are really prepared to study with you in the future. So really just thank you so much, though, for taking the time to tell me about everything, you know, the history and your style. And it's such a pleasure to talk to you. It really is. Again, thank you so much to everyone who's watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the little bell to be notified when we put out new videos every single week. I'm going to continue to interview amazing practitioners like Kubota Sensei, and hopefully maybe Kubota Sensei again, because I think he has a lot more information to share with us on his amazing style. And until I see you next time, happy practicing. Okay. Kubota Sensei, 本当にどうもありがとうございました。